If I could have told 2018 Jonah anything, like when I would literally bawl my eyes out on my drive home because I'm like, I just can't do this anymore, it would have been, yeah, it's terrifying. But what's more terrifying, your mental well being and your happiness, or just taking a leap of faith and trying something new?
A movement is underway of people abandoning the emotional, physical, and financial expenses of city living and crafting their own purpose, livelihoods, and joy in the rural reaches. The Urban Exodus podcast shares the wisdom, wit, and stories of those who decided to embark on the road less traveled to pursue their own interpretation of the good life. Small business owners, change makers, artists, farmers, and more, working towards building a better future for themselves and their fellow citizens. This podcast is for country dreamers, rural folk, and urban dwellers alike who want to feel more connected to the natural world and the purpose and choices in their lives. I'm Melissa Hessler. Welcome to the Urban Exodus. I'm excited to invite you to my conversation with Jonna Lagunas, the Minnesotan homesteader behind J and L Coop. Jonna is a first-generation Mexican-American immigrant. Her parents and elder siblings immigrated to the United States before she was born. Jonna grew up in the city of Minneapolis, and her parents sent her to predominantly white schools so she could have an easier time assimilating. Battling prejudice in college, Jonna decided to leave school and get a job. Her personality, intelligence, and work ethic opened doors, and she quickly began climbing the corporate ladder. Even with her early career success, Jonna felt like something was missing, and she grew tired of the party scene in Minneapolis. When an opportunity to relocate came up, she jumped. At 21, Jonna moved to a small farming community, and that is where she met her partner. Now, 13 years later, they are building a fulfilling and happy life on their rented piece of heaven. I'm really excited today to be speaking with Jonna Lagunas, who runs the Instagram page J and L Coop, and I've been following you for quite some time. We are sisters of the northern reaches. You are actually in an even colder growing climate than I'm in. So I'm excited to hear some growing wisdom from you. You're in what, 4A or 4B?
4B.
First off, I'd really love to hear just a little bit of your personal backstory, where you grew up, how you met your partner, where you are now.
Thank you so much for having me to start off with, Alyssa. I'm so excited that you reached out to me for this. So originally, I am from Minneapolis. My parents moved us from Chicago, Illinois in 92, and I just call Minneapolis home because that's all I really know. I was 5 when we came here. So I did all of my schooling in Minneapolis, and then my whole background, I grew up in a very heavy Mexican culture. I grew up right off of Lake Street. If anyone's familiar with that area, it's a huge population of Mexican Americans and a lot of migrant workers. That's where I grew up. I grew up speaking Spanish at home and English in school. I went to pretty dominant white schools, and that was okay because my parents wanted to make sure that we understood that, yes, we're Mexican, but we're also American. So they wanted us to have both sides of it, which I'm so thankful for. And then I turned 18 and rebellious, and my parents couldn't control me anymore. I was going to the U of M, and unfortunately, I had to jump through a lot of hoops to get the same credit for courses that I'd taken in high school that my white friends got willingly. And that's a whole nother story. So I just told my parents, I'm not doing it. I'm just going to work full time. You guys did it. And I just really started working full time, moved out of my parents' house because they were like, if you're not going to school, you can't live here, or you need to go to school. And I was 19, I got this. I'm going to figure it out. So I moved out, and my first apartment was actually at the Midtown Exchange, which is the old Sears building in Minneapolis, it was dumb. It was so expensive. But I lived there until I was 20. And then when I was 21, I just turned 21, and I got offered a position to come down to Rochester to work for Lady Foot Locker as an assistant manager. And I was like, okay. And I never thought I would leave Minneapolis, but I knew I needed something different. It wasn't fun anymore. I wasn't getting any joy out of going out every night with my friends. Everyone I was meeting was just in a party scene, and I just was kind of over it. So I moved to Zumbrota, Minnesota, and my neighbor just literally happened to be a milk hauler. So what he did was he drove a truck that would go to different dairy farms in the Rochester area, pick up their milk and bring it to Kemp's downtown Rochester. And he was like, "Hey, are you single?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm living my best life here in Zumbrota." And he was like, "I have someone for you to meet." And I was like, "Absolutely not."
Don't you love how people love to play matchmaker?
Yeah, like always.
Especially in a small town.
Right? And I'm just like, no, like, because, I was taught to always like question who you're going to meet. You don't just like hang out with a random stranger. Like, I know better. Like, I hope a lot of people know that and instill that in their girls, which sucks. But I mean, you should know who you're hanging out with. So I stood up. I stood up my poor boyfriend. His name is Laramie. I stood him up 3 times. And like purposely was not around to meet him. And finally, like one day I happened to be at my apartment and he happened to be in there. And I walked in all snotty, like, "Hi, I'm the girl you're supposed to meet, but I'm not interested." And he just looked at me and was like, "Excuse you, like, who do you think you are?" And I don't know, one thing led to another. I was like, "Hey, should we go down, walk down to the liquor store and pick up some Mike's Hard Lemonade?" Because, 21, I didn't understand what good drinks were yet. And he was like, "No, I can't drink yet." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, how old are you?" And he was like, "How old are you? Are you like 16, 17?" I was like, "No, I'm 21. And he was like, "Well, I won't be 21 until August." And this was like in May. And then after that, we just got to talking about how unique our names were, our background. He was raised on a dairy farm, so he was talking to me about that. And I've always loved venison. And he started talking about how he hunts and how he does all this. And I was like, "Oh, great. So 2 weeks, out of the year, I won't see you." And he was like, "No, I archery hunt. I start in September and it goes until December." And I was like, "Tell me more." And I don't know, it wasn't like an instant attraction and he'll tell you the same. It was like having conversations that I'd never been able to have with anyone else. And almost 13 years later, here we are.
Wow, 13 years. That's amazing. I think that it's interesting, actually, a lot of my friends who have left the city and kind of the dating scene in the city, although it's certainly harder, there aren't as many options, obviously. You work a little bit harder to get to know somebody. It doesn't have to be that kind of instant attraction that you might have on dating apps and things like that. So that's a really beautiful story. I love that. So when did you move to the farm and what roles do you both play on your farmstead to keep things running?
So we moved out here. So we've been at this house since 2009 and we're very blessed. So we rented. It's an older farmhouse, but Laramie and I kind of always knew it was just going to be the 2 of us and our dogs. I love kids. They're just not for me. I admire people who have them. But so I started gardening that first or second year because his grandma and his mom and his younger sister, they were really into gardening. And I kind of grew up doing it, but a garden in Minneapolis to a garden out here, it's like night and day. Like there's no comparison. And he's a landscaper by trade. So he enjoys it, but he does not like tending to it. He likes to like come in here
like
and tell
taking
me
his work home.
Yeah, exactly. So the biggest thing that what he does is he's the main provider of meat. He is a hunter in the family. He's the one that like make sure that tree stands are set up, that food plots are set up. He is willing to guide everyone and anyone who wants to learn how to hunt. He's very ethical about it. So that's his big role. And he does a lot of like the outside yard maintenance. I'm more of the dreamer. I'm like, let's get all the chickens, let's grow this big garden, and then I'll like get overwhelmed with produce. And I'm like, what do I do? So I'm like the dreamer and giver where he's more like he has a good head on his shoulders and he's like, girl, you need to calm down.
That's a really good balance. You need that balance. There needs to be the dreamer and there needs to be like the executor and the you need to take a break dreamer.
Yeah, right. And it wasn't, so I was really big into gardening from like 2010 until like 2014. At that time, I had just really rolled out my career with a big corporation. I'm just not going to say their names. I don't want to get in trouble. But I literally lost myself. I lost every ounce that brought me joy. I almost lost our relationship. I almost lost everything that I was so proud that we accomplished together, all because I went from working 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, to working sometimes 7 days a week. And they were 12-hour shifts. And not only that, but I was commuting. So we live right outside of Rochester, Minnesota. And when people are like, oh, you live in like the country, yeah, but it's like literally 10 minutes from where we live to my current job that I have. Before, to get to my job, it was an hour and a half. Sometimes I had to be there at 5 a.m, which meant that I was up at like 2:45 doing what I could to help out the household and then leaving. And finally, I did that from 2016 until 2019 when I quit. And ever since I quit and like actually found my joy again in wanting to hunt and enjoying being outside and having the energy to spend time in the garden, it was like a 360 and like I'm a completely different person. And I'm so glad that even though it was a leap of faith, because I quit a job that I was bringing in, and this might not be a lot of money for some people, but for me, I was bringing in anywhere between 67,000 to like 79,000, depending on how good of a year we had and how good of a bonus I got, dropping down to a part-time role at a bank and pulling in, I think it was like 30,000 in 2019. And I was just like, oh my gosh. But the one thing I like, because my parents were like, why are you doing that? And I'm like, I'm not happy. Like, you guys taught me that you need to be happy. And as long as I feel fulfilled in my role and in my job and in my life, then it should be fine, right? Everything will work out. And I just realized I had to get creative, right? Like produce is expensive. So buying it, you're like, oh, but growing it, it's like therapy. I can go out there, blast a podcast, get lost for 5 hours and I'm good. I get tomatoes.
That's such a refreshing perspective, Jonna, because I feel like there are so many people who kind of feel trapped in achieving this American dream, right? Like in buying the house and buying 2 cars. But what you do is you sell yourself like you're owned by a company. Your time is not your own anymore. And so actually taking a step back and listening to yourself and realizing how unhappy you are. Like, what is happiness worth? Is it worth, an extra $30,000 a year? Probably, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The biggest thing that I tell everyone, like I have a massive garden and this is my first year I'm going to be canning. Mind blowing, right? Like it terrifies me. I'm so nervous to do it because I don't want to poison myself or anyone else.
It's very rare. Don't worry.
But I'm going to do it this year. It's my goal. We're going to do it. But even like with my chickens, like I just want to make sure that those people that I love around me are getting good, clean, cared for, and love for food. And if it means that it's a little bit more work for me, that's fine. Like it's honest, like people are like, oh, that's so much work. If I dedicate an hour to my garden and just do my morning and evening chores, it's a total of 2 hours out of my day to ensure that we have something that I can be proud of sharing and that I can, be like, here you go. Thanks for stopping by. Enjoy, like my dream is to put up a roadside stand and just say, take whatever you want and have a blessed day. But I need to make sure I can grow stuff this year before I can do that.
This season of the Urban Exodus podcast is brought to you by Jake.art. Bring the beauty of the outdoors in. A new online art shop brought to you by Urban Exodus. Search our collection of affordable, high-quality fine art prints and illustrations by color or theme to find just the right work for your home or office. Or commission us to do a custom illustration or photograph of a loved one. Visit jake.art, that's JAKE.ART, or click the shop button on urbanexodus.com. How hard has it been to kind of adapt to the growing zones there? When do you get your stuff in the ground? And do you have like row covers, or have you experimented with season extenders?
So I've never done any of that. I really enjoy it, but I also like enjoy my freedom. And I feel like if I did the road covers, I would have to give up a lot of extra time. So I just get stuff in the ground. The rule of thumb has always been Mother's Day weekend, which is next weekend. And that's typically when I do it. Last year, I really pushed it and I had to cover a lot. So I'm not going to do that again. I just don't have the patience to. I'm the kind of gardener where it's like, if I have to baby you, you're not going to make it in my garden. Like, I appreciate everyone else who does, but I can't justify it because there's so many cold hardy plants that we can grow that I don't want to put in the extra work to something that's going to be so needy.
That's how I feel about watermelons. Even though I love watermelons and I want to grow them, they just don't grow in Maine. There's nothing I can do about it.
Right? They're just too needy. And then you start talking about like if you start them inside and then you transplant them and they go in shock and the roots, and it's like, oh girl, like I don't even do that much for myself.
Yeah, that's great.
But our goal is, well, my goal, I should say, let me rephrase that. I wanted to get up a greenhouse. And so I've been collecting old windows. And so I'm hoping that if we can do that, it'll help extend at least like a little bit more of that cool crop in the springtime. And that would just be natural because I'm not going to run any power to it or like any heat. It'll just be what Mother Nature does. And we make it, or we learn next year that we're not going to do it.
Explain your farm and your land, kind of transport us there.
When you pull into our driveway, immediately to the west, you see an old, very old pine windbreak. The trees are like, I don't know, like maybe, I want to say like 100 feet tall. They give us all this protection from the open field to the east of us, or to the west of us, I mean, so that in the wintertime with the snow, you don't get as many snow drifts. And then, so you see that, and then you see a garage, you see an old grain silo, and then you see the old granary that we converted into a chicken coop. And that was all functioning buildings up until the 1970s. And then immediately when you're looking there to the right or to the west, then you see this old blue house. It's been standing, I want to say, since like 1906 is what our landlord said. And it's a very non-typical, like open concept home. Like it's not like that. You can definitely tell that this house was designed for people to come in, eat a meal, and then go to bed. That's literally how this house is. And it has like this adorable little porch that has, like the beadboard ceiling. And then you walk into our house and it's just the kitchen. It used to be a dining room, but it's a wood stove. So we do have backup heat as an old wood stove. So if our LP can't keep up with it when it's super cold, like we had 2 weeks where it was like -20 here, then we burn wood to help offset it. And even then, you can definitely tell that I've acclimated to this, because if it's warmer than 65 degrees in the house, I just can't handle it. I can't sleep. It's not an ideal. My mom has her house at 72 degrees. I don't know. It blows my mind. I just don't understand it. And then we have it upstairs, but it's only ever used in the summertime because the heat doesn't go all the way upstairs. We just use the main level usually, and then we go upstairs in the summertime for our bedroom. But then you keep coming into our yard, and then we have a patio that used to be an old pig barn, and now it's just gravel. And then we have our grill there and a little lounge area. And then in front of that, it's my garden this year. We moved it. And then that's going to be hopefully amazing. And then there's an old barn that used to be a milking barn also. And you can tell that a lot of the dairy farmers, which is really, really sad. So they had all this hay stored, to feed their cattle throughout the year. When they got out of it because of milk prices, all the hay just stays up there. Like there's nothing to do with it. Like there's just a big old mound of hay, but the barn is in such good condition that we're hoping to convert it to something. And mind you, we don't own any of this. Like we're very blessed that our landlord has allowed us to live here as long as we have. And we have pretty free range of what we do around here. So we're thankful for that. And then you keep going past the driveway, there's a blue barn, and then that holds all of the farmers' machinery. And then there's a hill and a little turnaround. And right behind that hill, it's all of the farmers' egg land. So I believe this year it's going to be soybeans because they do crop rotation. So to the west, it'll be soybeans, and then to the east, it'll be corn. And then again, that beautiful windbreak that you see when you drive in, because Laramie is such an avid archery hunter, that is an archery range underneath there because it helps control the wind. And he can shoot 100 yards from either direction. So it's beautiful. I used to joke with him someday it would be a beautiful wedding spot. But, I'm just teasing, but it is beautiful. And then I believe altogether that our landlord owns, I think this is like 120 acres, but the yard itself, I want to say is just under 3 or 4.
That sounds wonderful. Like your own little paradise.
Yeah. And we have neighbors, but country neighbors aren't the same like city neighbors. So we could be out there doing whatever we want to. We have a lot of get-togethers in the summertime, and because of our yard lights so bright, and we really enjoy hosting. Let me rephrase that. I really enjoy hosting, and Laramie's a really good cook. So we really just like to have people come out here. I love it. For the 4th of July, we have a get-together every year, and I love just being able to show like my parents and my siblings and like my extended family are like where we live, because for a lot of them, my oldest siblings, they were all born and like lived in Mexico until they were 9. I believe 9. My sister was 9 when she came to the US. And then I think my oldest brother was like either 13 or 14. So they remember what it was like living in Mexico in the open space and the fresh air and, just being able to go for a walk without hearing all these vehicles. And they all tease me that they never would have expected it to be me, but here I am.
You obviously come from a very tight-knit family. How has that transition been living far away from them now?
It is so hard. It is. So I always joke, I know I'm not the favorite because I'm one of 3 sisters and I'm the baby. So my sister Laura and I share our dad, and then my sister Julia and I share our mom. And it was really, really hard. Like when I first moved away, I didn't care because I was 21 and I was like, I'm going to live my own life. But now that I've gotten older and like, especially like in the last 4 years, having to miss such big milestones, it's really tough. Or like if anything ever happens, like with my family, it's hard not being able to just be like a 5-minute drive because it's an hour and a half to get to my mom. Family is everything to me. We may not all see eye to eye, but we all rally around each other whenever anything good, bad, or, all of a sudden happens. I wish that we all lived closer. If it were up to me, my parents would live with me, but they won't. So it's tough. But also, I think that it makes it a little bit easier because it's just me down here versus like all of us being scattered. At least my 2 sisters are up there that can check in with my parents all the time.
I know that we have talked about this a little bit. You're a progressive thinker living in a predominantly kind of conservative area. How do you navigate relationships with people who don't maybe have the same political or ideological beliefs as you?
It's tough. One thing a lot of people don't understand is that it's okay to have different point of views, but if I'm going to say something, I just need you to listen. So the one rule that Laramie and I have, which I know a lot of people don't understand this, but it's just a boundary that we had to set up. So he's a white male. He grew up in Orinoco, Minnesota, which is a small town on a dairy farm. He had no exposure to anyone that wasn't white. the fact that he even considered dating someone who isn't white is actually a miracle because of how he was raised and what he understands, But we just don't talk politics, and we'll mention things, but we don't go into deep conversation because we're not going to win. We're both stubborn. He won't see my point of view. I understand his side, but at the same time, I want to shake him and be like, but you're wrong. So we just don't talk about it. As far as how I deal with it with other people, it's tough. It's really hard. I don't think, and sorry to get emotional, but I think that people forget that at the end of the day, I was raised Mexican, 100%. My parents would get made fun of if someone didn't understand what they needed at a store. I remember being 9 having to translate for my parents, and I didn't even understand the words. I remember going to appointments having to try to translate for my parents, and the nurses looking at us like my parents were being abusive, and they weren't at all. It was just that they didn't understand it because people weren't willing to work with them. And that was really tough, like having to have that realization that not everyone was very open or willing to help my parents. I mean, for them to buy their first house, I can't even imagine what kind of journey that was, because they speak English enough for us to have a slight conversation, but if you want to get into like politics or anything, they just can't. They can't form the words or anything like that, but they try. They've adapted to American culture, but because when they speak, they have an accent, they're looked at differently or treated differently. So people forget that a lot, that, yeah, I speak English very well. And yes, a lot of people would say I'm very Americanized, but there's a lot of layers to me. And it goes both ways. The Hispanic community is not very nice. They judge a lot. They judge because I'm a 34-year-old woman who lives with a guy, and I refuse. If my aunts call him my husband, that's not my husband. He's my boyfriend. Well, you live with him. That's fine. He's not my husband. Well, why don't you have kids? How is that any of your business? Like, why does that concern you? And it's just harsh. But with people around me, I just give them that perspective. I say, how would you like to have a conversation with your child that they need to make sure that they comply, regardless if they're in the right or wrong, and that they're not allowed to speak up to defend themselves because they could get killed? Well, my kid, you're right. It would never happen to your blonde-haired, blue-eyed child. You are 100% correct. Let's pretend that was my child. Let's pretend that I decided to have a kid and he came out or she came out with dark hair and dark eyes and light skin. And I would still have to have that conversation like, you know what, you have to comply. Even if you're not in the wrong, you still have to comply, because it's how you look on the outside, not to what on the inside, how you're perceived, which is a shame. We should be done with this conversation, yet here we are in 2021.
Have you felt kind of a pressure? I mean, you grew up in Minneapolis. That's your hometown. Have you felt kind of this feeling of wanting to maybe be back there as all of this is happening, or trying to represent it as best you can in the community where you're planted now?
1,000%. I feel like, so last year when the protests with George Floyd, after everything happened, when he got murdered, I felt completely useless that I was not up there. And I knew it wasn't smart to go up there. I was like, why? I don't want to put myself in a situation that I can get in trouble. But my brothers were out there, and I'm literally texting them every hour. Hey, if you need to get bailed out, give me a call. I don't care that if it starts a fight with mom and dad, give me a call. I'll be up there. Hey, if anything happens, give me a call. Be up there. I have a couple of high school friends that were running, like doing Costco runs. I would just be like, here's money. Go buy whatever the protesters need. And then people around here kept saying like, oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. And I'm like, but wouldn't you be upset? Like, come on, white people started the American Revolution, and I don't remember anyone complaining. Like, we're not complaining about that because they were oppressed and they had enough. Instead of being negative about it, why don't you take the time to understand it? And down here, they're like, oh, Minneapolis, they're just crazy. And I'm like, no, they just had enough. They're not crazy. It's just enough is enough. Oh, it's so bad out there. And I'm like, it is not that dangerous. Anywhere anything could happen to you in any part, in any city. All it takes is for one bad person to be there. I'm so sick of people around the country saying that, the Minnesota governor can't get their people under control. The people are sick of it. Look at any city that has a diverse, population. Yeah, they're going to stand up and be sick of it.
Yeah, because it's been going on for so long.
Yes, for so long. So another fun thing, we go to Nebraska every year, and we go to this very small town that it's all white people. And, they're used to me now. But when I first went out there, they're like, oh my gosh. But when we went out there last October, they were like, yeah, you Minnesotans are crazy. And I was like, what? They were like, what's going on? You guys can't control anything. And it's all for, you're protesting for people who are bad people. And I just looked at Jean, and I love her, and she's an old rancher. And I was like, no, there's more to it than that, Jean. And she was like, well, just comply. And I was like, okay, well, let's just comply. So if you're telling someone that you can't breathe, and they continue to hold your down or hold your neck, and you're saying, please stop, I can't breathe, are you going to comply? She was like, well, no. I'm like, exactly. Like it's you're asking for your life. Like, and she was like, well, I heard this and that. And I was like, but what does that have anything to do with him saying that he couldn't breathe? And she was like, well, and I'm like, yeah. I'm like, all right, well, think about that. What did it have anything to do with that? And she was like, well, nothing. I'm like, exactly. We can start taking skeletons out of every single person out of their closet, but it's neither here or there. We're talking about this one instance that, that caused him his life. It's tough, though.
I think it's really important that people who are in rural areas who are seeing what's happening, that they speak to their friends and loved ones, but it doesn't make those conversations any easier. But it's nice to just have those conversations, especially if it's coming from someone that they know and that they love. And maybe they never really thought about things exactly like you were saying with your partner. They never really thought about those things because they just weren't exposed to it.
Yeah. And, bless his entire family's heart. Like, I am maybe the second person that's been a part of the family that hasn't been white. And I know that they don't mean it out of a bad place in their heart, but his grandpa, bless his heart, one of the first things he said to me, he dropped the N-word. And he was like, what type of N-word are you? And I was like, excuse me, like, I'm Mexican. And he was like, so are you legal? And I was like, I don't know, are you? Like, excuse you. And, everyone chuckled, and I was like, it's not funny. It's not funny at all. And my boyfriend was like, you have to understand. I was like, but I don't have to understand. I go, it's 2008. There's some questions you don't ask. There's some you do. Just like, I don't understand why people do this. So when someone asks me, where are you from? I'm like, oh, Minneapolis. They're like, no, but where are you from? Chicago? No, but where are you from? Can you please just ask me what my ethnical background is? Or what, whatever. Like, ask me. Don't tiptoe around it. Because really, if you want to know where I'm from, according to Ancestry DNA, I'm from Nigeria, I'm from Italy, I'm from Spain, I'm from central Mexico. Like, what else do you want to know?
Yeah, absolutely. Why do people feel like they have to pigeonhole people into those? And those questions are exactly right. It's the tiptoe, right? Like, yes. Oh, but no, you look so different. You're like, come on. For people who are living in the city and maybe they feel like they're trapped by career or circumstance, what advice do you have on how you can plan to, change your environment, change your life for the better, kind of listen to those voices that you have in your head that you're unhappy?
You have to be open-minded. You have to understand that if there is a reason why those thoughts keep creeping in, it's because something is just not sparking the joy anymore. And it's scary. When I left Minneapolis, I had no plan. No plan whatsoever. I have no idea how things continue to work out, but I had no plan. But if I could have told 2018 Jonah anything, like when I would literally bawl my eyes out on my drive home because I'm like, I just can't do this anymore, it would have been, yeah, it's terrifying. But what's more terrifying, your mental well being and your happiness, or just taking a leap of faith and trying something new?
And maybe not having super high
Oh
expectations
gosh,
either.
yeah. Yeah, if you're expecting to like I mean, kudos to you if you can do it. But if you can find a piece of heaven that whatever your heaven, definition is right away, then heck yes, you're doing something right. Give me all your tips. But you also have to understand it's okay to start small. And if you're in a job right now that you're not happy, do something, get outside, plant something, find a new routine, go for a walk. I know that right now with COVID, it's super tough to be able to have these conversations. Be part of a book club. If that doesn't spark joy, then maybe find a community garden. If that doesn't spark joy, then maybe pick up a new hobby. If that doesn't do it, then just keep trying until you find something that you wake up every day and you're excited to do. Because I can tell you that when my alarm goes off at 5:45 in the morning, 9 times out of 10, I'm excited to get up and go check on my chickens and my ducks and make sure they're okay. I'm excited to get up to let my dogs out so they can potty and run around and make sure that all of their areas are still there. I'm excited to walk into the garden when it's growing and like, oh, hi, little radishes and carrots. I'm so glad you made it through the night. It's not anything material for me, which is crazy. I would have never thought I would say that in my life, but it's those things that the money, I guess, is there because I have to feed everyone, but money doesn't buy that. Money doesn't buy that happiness when I walk outside with my cup of coffee and the birds are chirping and the sun is starting to come out and I can just walk outside and I can be like, oh, like this is my life. How lucky am I?
Yeah, and taking those moments too, even in all of the hard work and the, toiling away and the sweaty garden conditions, to take a step back and really appreciate what you're building, the stage that you're at, and, biting off like chunks that you can take at the moment and knowing that it's going to take a while.
What really makes it awesome for me is the fact that, I'm not a mom, but I have my nieces and nephews, and they talk about Auntie Jonna and Uncle Laramie's farm all the time. All the time. They look forward to coming down. They count down for the ones that I only see around the 4th of July. They count down to coming down here. When I get chickens and I bring them fresh eggs, they're like, they brag about it. These are from Auntie Jonna. These are from her chickens, and they're happy chickens, and I don't know, I don't know what I did to deserve it, but I am thankful for it.
This episode is brought to you by the workshops at How Hill Farm, a new photography and creative workshop series brought to you by Urban Exodus. Workshops are hosted online and at our farm headquarters in Midcoast, Maine. The workshops at How Hill Farm offer learning experiences that encourage you to experiment with new techniques, hone your creative vision, and advance your professional opportunities. Check out How Hill Farm's full lineup of online and in-person offerings by visiting the workshops page on the Urban Exodus website. Do you feel like you've built a really strong community there? What was it like to kind of adjust? And, a lot of small rural towns are tight-knit, and it can be hard for an outsider to kind of weave themselves into that fabric.
First off, Laramie has such a strong reputation around here for being just such a straight shooter and honest and giving person that really helped. But like I said, I'm such a giver, and I really have a very small select of people that I trust. And when you are in my circle, I will do everything to maintain that friendship and everything that I can to continue to build it, nourish it, help each other, cheer each other on, pick you up when you fall down. We're very lucky. Every friend that I have happens to have started off being Laramie's friends. So like our group of friends are our neighbors, the Lees. So Jesse and Jessica, they moved around this area also in 2008. So I think it was like in 2011 that we really started hanging out with them. But she's, again, a very progressive thinker for such a small area. And so her and I just click because we understand it. We understand the struggles. We get it. But we also want to live in this area and provide good food for our families. And so her and I talk a lot about the injustices and like what's going on and how do we educate the next generation. We talk about it all the time. So that's how I built my relationship with her and taking her husband apart from it, like just having that friendship. Then our other good friends are Jeremy and Jasmine. And Jasmine, she grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota too. And she, again, she lives in Rochester, but again, it's a small community when you compare it to any other city. And she, again, is a progressive thinker and she's a social worker and she talks a lot about mental health. And her and I connect there because we get it. You know, where a lot of farmers are like, ugh, there's no such thing as depression. You just need to get outside. She's like, no, there is such a thing as depression. You got to check on that. So I give my all to my two girlfriends and they do it for me in return because we understand what it's like to be around people who just don't get it.
So maybe you don't have as wide of a social circle, but they're really meaningful relationships.
And that's another thing. I wish that all of my Instagram friends were my real life friends because I've built so many connections on Instagram too. But I get it that that it's not about quantity, it's about quality. And those two women bring out the best in me. I mean, sometimes they bring out the worst side because at the end of the day, we are girls, but but they do bring out the best. And I love that I can have honest conversations with them without being nervous. Like I can literally be like, you're white, you don't get it. Let me just say it. And they'll be like, yes, I understand.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to be able to have that in your life and to feel like you have a support system there. What plans do you have for J and L Coop in the coming years? What do you envision?
I added turkeys and ducks this year. So I'm hoping that I have to downsize my chickens because I have too many and I don't have enough time to like really gather all the eggs. So I need to get better about that.
You're eating frittata 3 days a week or 3 times a day.
Literally. And I sell to a lot of my coworkers. I just feel guilty charging more than $2 a dozen and everyone teases me about it. But so the goal is, and I'm hoping it'll happen this year and I'll keep you updated, but I would really want to build a little roadside stand and just put free produce out there. I want to be able to donate eggs to like low income families. I would love it if people would just come out here and tour and bring their kids out here just so they can see where food comes from. Because I think it's such an important skill set that a lot of people who live in the city just don't understand it because they didn't grow up around it, like where their food comes from. And I'll never get rid of my chickens completely, but I really like ducks. And I don't know if you've ever had a duck egg, but I am going to continue to keep the chickens and continue to, grow them. And like, I'm actually getting rid of 10 of them to a lady I met on Instagram. Her name is the Jenny Homestead, which I'm glad I built that connection because she also speaks Spanish and she lives in this area. She understands like the struggles of like always being put into a bubble because you're an older woman without kids and, whatever not. So just hopefully not kill anything because last year a raccoon killed half my flock. So that was devastating, but we'll see. No major plans to expand right now. Just keep the ones I have going and keep the garden going and hopefully can and be able to share some of that goodness too.
That's wonderful. You are still working an off-farm job. What do you do for work outside of building your farmstead and how do you really balance the two?
When I left the corporation, I started working at a bank. It's a local bank here in Rochester. When I started, I was a teller. And then I progressed to being a universal banker. So basically, I did everything but lending. And then I just recently got promoted this year, and I'm now in the call center. And I work 9 to 6, Monday through Friday. And the balance, it's amazing. My new boss, he is so understanding. I don't think I've ever worked for someone where I walked in the Monday after I sent you the email that my uncle and everything that had happened again. I walked in and I was like just overwhelmed with everything that was happening. And he was like, you need to leave. He was like, if you want to drive to Minneapolis, that's fine. If you don't want to, that's okay. But I can tell that your mind's not here. You need to take care of yourself. And I was able to go spend that Monday with my parents before the National Guard really rolled out and everything happened. And thankfully, my uncle's okay. But it was just all the emotions from last year where everything just happened so quickly that I couldn't grasp any of it. It was just like, how do you react to it? It was really nice to have someone understand and I could just leave and be with my family.
It's been a really traumatizing time for just the community of Minneapolis. You went to school on the road
Where George Floyd was murdered, that's on 36th in Chicago, that little corner store. I used to bike past that when I was in middle school. We used to go to Potterhorn Park, and they have a huge May Day parade. And a guy I saw at one point in my life lived on that road also. And so we would stop at that corner store all the time to get food, to get pop, to get chips. Like it was just a pit stop. And I used the public transportation and I would get on and off there as well. And it was just crazy. And sometimes when I didn't want to go down Portland Avenue to get to my parents' house, I would go down Chicago Avenue. And it's just crazy. My he has a duplex over on 32nd in Chicago, and his windows all got smashed in. And they had to put up plywood like, hey, kids live here, because all of his grandkids live there too. And so, it was just crazy. Like, I just couldn't believe it. And even just being up there the Monday right after Dante Wright, after he got killed, that seeing everyone like on Lake Street putting up all their plywood again and seeing all the writing that was up, because it was all the plywood that was up during the protest when George Floyd got murdered. It was all that same plywood they'd saved, and they were putting it back up again. And it was just crazy. It was, and I was talking to my mom, and I was like, it's one thing to see the plywood going up and you're like, okay, they're preparing. But then if anyone's familiar with Lake Street, it's called the Mercado Central. And that was basically like the first indoor Mexican shopping center. So like, I guess like our mall. And there was National Guards all around it and all of the alleyways, and like streets were getting blocked off and you had to go around. And that was intense to me. Like the National Guard being there, I understand it. But that was just a lot to understand. Like people who fight for our freedom are now here, and it's like, what? Like I was just like, hang on, what?
Yeah. And I mean, it's your home. Like Minneapolis, I mean, I don't know how many people are listening to this know about Minneapolis, but it feels like a small town. It is a city. Each community really does feel like a small town. You do know your neighbors. It's not like some cities where you feel like kind of isolated.
And people will hear this and say, well, Lake Street, it's a rough area. My parents have never had a problem since they've lived there. And, like, yeah, maybe it's a rough area, but where else are they going to go? That's the only place they could afford in a community that they felt comfortable, that they could go to a grocery store, speak their own language without someone looking at them.
Well, and what's the lens of a rough area, right? Is the lens of a rough area over policing and like basically making it so that people don't have other options? Then like that can't be the lens of how we look at things.
Back to the whole police comment, I'm going to admit to this out loud, and I think I've only ever told one person. The police terrify me. They scare me. They scare me so bad. So when I was working my corporate job, I would be coming home at like 2 a.m. after an ad set, and an ad set was like a promotional flyer that was going out, and you'd have to execute it, and I'd have to stay if it wasn't done kind of thing. And I got pulled over one time when I was on Highway 52 coming south. The cop pulled me over. He didn't give me a reason why. And I was like, hi. And he was like, why? Where are you coming from? And I was like, work. He was like, there's no place that's open this late. I'm like, you're right. I'm the idiot that stayed until this hour. And he just looked at me. And Laramie had made spaghetti. And I had spaghetti and I had garlic bread wrapped in tin foil. And it was sitting in my passenger seat. And he looked at it and I was like, it's garlic bread. Did you want some? And he was like, well, do you know why I pulled you over? And I was like, I honestly don't know. He was like, your music was too loud. And I was like, I was just trying to stay awake, but I'll make sure I turn it down for next time.
Wow.
A month later, that same guy pulled me over at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, hi again. And he goes, hi. And I'm like, is there a reason why I got pulled over, sir? And he was like, well, your muffler's loud. I'm like, oh, I was like, it's been this loud for I don't know how long, but I'm sorry. I'm shopping for a new vehicle. I'm not going to get it fixed right now. And he was like, okay. I was like, is there anything else? And and I'm shaking this entire time. I'm trying to be polite, but I'm also annoyed. And he was like, nope, just drive safe. And I'm like, okay. Then I was stopped. I pulled off of an exit to get out and wake myself up because it was like 3 a.m. And a cop came behind me and they were like, what are you doing? I was like, oh, I was just falling asleep. So I figured I'd get out and stretch out my legs. And he was like, why are you out this late? I'm like, I'm trying to get home and I should have slept at my parents', but I wanted to get home and, whatever not. And he was like, well, it just looks suspicious. And I was like, I know, but I didn't want to fall asleep behind the wheel. And I started tearing up. And he was like, all right, well, I'm just going to stay here until you leave. And so then instead of being helpful, I felt like I was being rushed. So I just got in my car and rolled my windows down and I didn't turn my music on because I knew he was behind me. But it was it wasn't helpful. Every time they stopped me, it was for no reason.
It was checking to see what you were up to, see if they could pin something on you. Yeah.
And now in my new vehicle, which my boyfriend surprised me with, I've never been pulled over one time because I was in a process of purchasing it. So it's under his name. And and it's paid off, and I should probably do something about that. But I've never once gotten pulled over, ever. And I've had cops behind me where I've been speeding and I haven't been pulled over. It's just crazy to me. I don't get it. I'm hoping it has something to do with it being a newer vehicle, but I don't know.
What part of this life that you're building brings you the greatest joy?
Knowing that I have Laramie as my partner in it, knowing that every crazy idea I come up with, that he's still going to be there regardless. And knowing that even if I make a dumb decision, driving an hour and a half one way, that at the end of the day, I get to still come home. And yeah, we may not see eye to eye on everything, but knowing that we support each other and knowing that he'll continue to push me and continue to be like, hey, that's not realistic. And, vice versa, me being like, but it'll bring me so much happiness. Knowing that that regardless if we have to move out tomorrow from here, that I can still continue to build whatever that next dream looks like with him. That definitely helps.
Have you guys looked at buying your own place or thinking about planting permanent roots in the future?
I don't know how well this is going to go, but we're really hoping that eventually our landlord's going to want to sell us this piece of land. We've talked about it with him in the past. I think we brought it up 4 years ago and he just wasn't ready yet. But his only child is graduated from college and wants nothing to do with farming. So we're hoping maybe he'll reconsider in the next year or two. Ideally, here where we're at is where we would love to live. But we also know that we need to start looking at other options and thinking of something else. We will stay in the area, but Olmsted County is really expensive. And I think it's because of Mayo Clinic. But we're hoping to stay somewhere here because where we're at, we can be at Expo Park, which is this beautiful hiking area, and it's right on the river and we're right above it. So we have a beautiful scenery and landscape, but we also know that that might not happen. And if that's the case, then we definitely would have to purchase land, hopefully at least 5 acres to build a house. And it would have to be big enough to house all of my boyfriend's mounts because he's an avid deer hunter. So there's a lot of mounts in the house. And I hunt too, but he's very much so does it in a different way than the average hunter. He likes to learn the deer before he goes after them, kind of thing. So he told me that he was an archery hunter when we first met. I was like, tell me more. So I would tag along with him to go do 3D shoots. And what those are is they set up different animal targets on a hiking trail, and they set up different yards and you have to shoot at it. And then the center of the target is 10 points, and then it goes down to 8 and 5, and then a 0 if you miss. So I was like, maybe I could do this. And then 3 weeks before archery opener in 2008, he gave me a bow that he'd purchased for his sister. And he was like, hey, let's start shooting. And so I did. And I think if I went out and missed a bunch. But the thing that I enjoy about it is how patient and methodical you have to be about it. So you need to be in a tree stand because you don't want to be eye level, so they watch you draw back. And you also have to make sure that like you're kind of predicting where they're going to be. So if it's nighttime, you're not going to go deep in the woods because at night they're coming out into the fields to feed. And then in the mornings, you don't want to be out in an open field. You want to be inside because they're coming to their beds. So the best way that Laramie describes it is you have to figure out where their bedroom is. And and you want to like not disturb their bedroom, but be like a hanging in their bedroom where they don't even realize that you're there. And so even with like, I went shotgun hunting last weekend for turkeys and I got one. But with archery, you have to be so careful about your scent. You have to be so careful about where the placement of your tree stand is. And you have to do a lot of work, like a lot of pre-work, because you can't just go into a tree and hope that a limb didn't grow. Like it has to be trimmed. And this is where I'm very lucky that Laramie lives in the woods. He loves it. So he does all of the work for me. I'm very silver spoon fed. He just tells me where we're going to go and we go, and I hope I don't miss. So.
And you guys use all of the meat that you hunt.
100%. And there's a lot of people around here that know that if they're like, hey, like we're interested in half a deer. And Laramie won't shoot anything unless he knows it's going to be claimed. Then he'll be like, absolutely. Like I'll try to get one in the next 3 weeks kind of thing. And then he'll butcher it himself. And then he'll go ahead and call them up like, hey, it's butchered. It's in the freezer. Here's the portion of the take. Just make sure you have that with you. Yeah, none of it goes to waste. I absolutely love venison. There's so many things you can make with it. And if you cook it right, which I'm not a cook, it's Laramie that cooks, and it's very good.
2020 was a really hard year on so many levels, and 2021 is also proving to be very difficult. I feel like the curtain has been pulled back on a lot of things that are wrong in our society and our world. It's just like everything is laid bare. What has this difficult time taught you, and how are you carrying that into your work for the future?
I realized that I have to listen to understand and not just listen to hear. If someone who doesn't understand why people of color are so upset, I have to remember that I can't just jump down their throat for it. I have to listen to understand why they think it's not a problem. And then educate them and then be like, well, like give scenarios, come with facts. It's been very, how do I say this? So I feel like because I'm not in the middle of it every day, I feel like I don't do enough because I can go about my everyday life and just have that uncomfortable conversation, but just move on with my day. Whereas the people in Minneapolis can't do that. They have to live through it, day after day. But I feel like I've just learned that it's okay to let go of people and not have acquaintances that may not understand what the struggle of every day is. Like I had people who literally were okay with the insurrection that happened, but weren't okay with the protests last year. Like how? Can someone give me that logic? Like how are you okay with that, but you're not okay with the protests? Like what? So I've learned to just, like I said, listen to understand and try to not prejudge like they're prejudging everything. But it's hard because I want to shake them and be like, what the F is wrong with you?
But also just letting things go that don't serve you. I think that's a great lesson. It's like a reoccurring theme in your life. You listen to those voices in your head that you need to change or you need to move, or maybe college isn't the right fit for you at that point. And so just listening to those things and following through, I think, is the other part, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. And, like I said, I don't know how things have worked out for me, but they continue to. And I'm very lucky in that sense. But I also know that I think it's easier for me because it is just myself and near me. It's okay for me to be like, you're not good for me. Bye. I think it'd be a lot harder if there was kids involved. How do I walk away from this community that may be a support system? But I would hope that if that was the case, that I would want to surround that child around people who are going to, help them be a good person in their life. We have a goddaughter and I strive to teach her all the time. Like you would think she was ours. We have Easter egg hunts here for her. We talk to her about hunting and how you have to do it right. We talk to her about the chickens and how you have to care for them. We talked to her about the garden. She loves broccoli. So when she comes out here, last year she had to help me weed it. And yeah, she was only 2, but she has to understand there's work to this. You get to enjoy the fruits of it, but you also have to put in the work. And, and I know that again, I always tell her mom is Jasmine. I always have to tell her, if we overstep, you have to let us know. But when she starts screaming or throwing a tantrum and we just go, what's wrong? Tell me, instead of yelling, what's wrong? And she'll calm down or she won't. But, Laramie and I talk about it a lot and we just want her to have a good chance at her future. And we want to make sure that this world is better for her and for our nieces and nephews and for all of our friends' kids. And we just want to leave the future hopefully a little bit better for them. And if it means that right now I have to be okay with letting go of friendships or having awkward conversations, and so be it. But I don't want the kids that are our future to have to continue to have these, conversations. Why?
Let's be the last generation to have these conversations.
Please. Yeah. An acquaintance said the other day that, or last year around everything, she was like, well, I just tell my kids to not see color. And I'm like, but tell them to see color. Color is beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay, your kid doesn't understand that. That's fine. But it's beautiful. Why shouldn't you point it out?
Well, and understanding the constructs of white supremacy is the only way to kind of fight against it, right?
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So if everybody is the same, then you really aren't seeing it for what it is.
Exactly.
It's been such a pleasure to talk with you, Jonna. I so appreciate you coming on the show. Tell people how they can follow along in your journey.
I only do Instagram. So if you want to follow along, it's at J and L Coop. That's the only page I have. So I hope, I have a personal one too. It's not really as exciting as J and L Coop. So just follow me at J and L Coop.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Jonna Lagunas. I so appreciate Jonna's candidness, grace, and her approach to life. She has had to make a lot of difficult decisions to realize her own unique path to happiness. From choosing to leave college, to moving to the country, to not having kids, to leaving the corporate world, to building a homestead, and to having difficult and honest conversations with friends and relations to open their minds and hearts to new perspectives. If you currently live in a rural area, my hope is that Jonna's words will inspire you to have your own difficult and open conversations with your friends, family, and neighbors. It is only through conversation that we can begin to find common ground and stop the cycle of prejudice, divisiveness, and anger in our country. You can find additional photographs from Jonna's homestead and a link to follow her homesteading journey on Instagram by visiting our blog at urbanexodus.com. Hi, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. Urban Exodus is a labor of love, and it's only made possible by your generous support. Maybe you just discovered Urban Exodus, or maybe you followed the project for a long time. Either way, please consider supporting my efforts so I can keep this going. The first and easiest way is to click the support button at the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount you like. Second, sponsor an episode of the podcast as a business or individual and get a 20-second ad spot in an upcoming episode. Just click the podcast link on urbanexodus.com to learn more. Third, you can sign up for an in-person or online workshop with me or one of the incredible creative professionals through our workshops at How Hill Farm. Click the workshops page on urbanexodus.com to learn more. Fourth, you can buy something from Jake.art, our new Urban Exodus online shop. A fine art print or wall art for your home or office. A custom illustration or portrait of your family or loved one. There are so many cool things. Just click the shop page to peruse what's available. Lastly, you can hire me to photograph your business or family, or take one of my online or destination workshops. Click the collaborations page on urbanexodus.com to learn more. Another really excellent way to support is to recommend Urban Exodus to your friends and relations. Also by giving a 5-star ratings on iTunes to beat the algorithm and so that we can be more easily searchable. Your continued support will keep this passion project running. I want anyone who feels unfulfilled by career or circumstance to know that they have options and alternatives. All of the work that I do through this project is to encourage people to believe in themselves and to work towards a better future for their community and the planet. Thank you for helping me continue to do this work. You can find Urban Exodus on Instagram and Facebook at The Urban Exodus. To read more in-depth features on folks who ditched the city and went country, visit urbanexodus.com. Until next time, I'm Alyssa Hessler, and this is The Urban Exodus.